What happens when a CEO goes undercover and watches his own manager humiliate a delivery driver in front of everyone? Jacob Price built the business from scratch in his 20s, just him, an old van, and a $100 coffee machine. Now, 15 years later, he had 8 locations spread across the state. Each one was supposed to reflect the values he believed in from day one: respect, hustle, and treating people right. But lately, something fell off. Sales at store number 6 kept dipping. Customer complaints were rising: slow service, cold food, rude staff. Jacob had gone through the reports, listened to his district manager's excuses, and sat through Zoom meetings full of rehearsed answers. None of it felt real. So he decided to do what had always worked: get his hands dirty. He shaved the beard he'd had for years, dyed his hair darker, and wore thick-rimmed glasses. He used a fake name, Dave, and got a set of corporate application papers printed by HR, who were sworn to secrecy. Since he'd never visited that store in person before, too busy expanding and managing other locations, no one there had ever met him. It was perfect. Jacob showed up on a Tuesday morning, pretending to be a new hire sent from headquarters for hands-on training. The store sat on the edge of a busy strip mall. From the outside, it looked clean enough. Inside, energy was low. Some workers moved like they were trying not to be noticed, while others barely looked up. No one greeted him. A woman behind the counter finally noticed him and called out, "You here for training?" Her name tag said Cheryl Manager. She didn't smile. "Yeah, I'm Dave. Corporate sent me over." Cheryl let out a sigh and waved him around. "Great. Just what I needed." "Another newbie. Go clock in. We'll figure out something for you to do." The training was a joke. No one explained anything. He was told to wipe tables, restock napkins, and clean the floors. He didn't mind, he'd done worse, but what bothered him was how everyone seemed tense, like they were waiting for something to go wrong. By mid-morning, he started noticing more, like the way Cheryl barked orders but never moved from behind the counter, or how she rolled her eyes when a customer asked a question. But the worst came just before lunch. A delivery driver walked in. Young guy, looked no older than 20. He was holding 2 heavy boxes of frozen goods, his shirt soaked with sweat. "Hey, delivery for store 6, the guy said, setting the boxes down. Cheryl didn't even look up from her phone. "Put it by the freezer. You people always dump it wherever anyway." The driver hesitated. Actually, I was told to get a signature, and I need to scan the delivery before I leave." She looked up, irritated. "You think I've got time for that? Do I look like I'm here to babysit you?" He blinked, clearly caught off guard. "I'm just doing my job, ma'am." "Then do it faster." "What? Do you need someone to hold your hand? You're lucky we even still use your company. Last week half the stuff was melted." Jacob stood nearby, frozen. The whole staff heard it. No one said anything. The kid's face turned red. He fumbled for his scanner without a word, did his job, and walked out. Jacob followed him outside. "Hey," he said quietly. "That wasn't right." The driver looked surprised. "You work there?" "Just started. Sorry about what happened in there." The kid shrugged. "It's not the first time. I just do my drop and go. Not worth the fight." Jacob watched him drive off. Rage burned in his chest. This wasn't how his stores were supposed to be. This wasn't what he built. Inside, Cheryl was laughing with another worker. "Did you see his face?" she said. "Like I was gonna cry with him." Jacob clenched his jaw and walked back in. He finished his shift, said nothing, and left when it was time. That night, he sat in his car outside the store for almost an hour. He thought about the early days, the friends who helped him paint his first shop, the customers who kept coming back because it felt like family. He stared at the lights of store 6 and realized something had slipped through the cracks. He'd let this happen. Not anymore. The next day, he came back. But not as Dave. He wore his usual suit. His beard was growing back, and the glasses were gone. He walked through the front door at noon. Cheryl glanced up. Can I help? Then she froze. Behind him, the district manager, a tall guy named Aaron, followed. He'd been brought in earlier that morning, and from the pale look on his face, he knew something serious was happening. Jacob didn't say a word to Cheryl. He turned to the crew behind the counter. My name is Jacob Price. I own this company. The room went dead silent. One of the workers dropped a spoon in shock. Cheryl's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Jacob looked at her, calm but firm. We need to talk. Now. Cheryl led him into the cramped office behind the kitchen, her steps stiff and uneven. The second the door closed, her posture changed. Gone was the casual lean she'd had the day before. Now, her back was ramrod straight, arms folded tightly across her chest. I didn't know you were coming, she said, her voice clipped. Jacob didn't sit. He stood beside the desk, his tone calm but controlled. That's the point. She shifted her weight. If I'd been told in advance, I would have made sure things were running smoother. It's been a rough couple of weeks. I've already seen what I needed to, he said flatly. Let's talk about how you speak to people. She blinked, thrown off. I wasn't aware there was a problem with communication. You humiliated someone in front of your entire staff yesterday. A delivery driver. You accused him of being incompetent, mocked him, and made him feel small. And from the reactions I saw, that wasn't the first time. She looked away, jaw tightening. I run a tight operation. If someone can't keep up, I don't sugarcoat it. Jacob's voice stayed even. It's not about sugarcoating. It's about basic respect. You don't get to tear people down just because you think they're below you. She gave a short laugh. So now I'm being lectured on tone? That kid drops boxes like he's delivering pizza. I don't have time to babysit vendors who don't know what they're doing. Jacob stared at her for a long beat. You think the people around you are the problem, but the culture in this store is broken. That starts with leadership. She opened her mouth to protest, but he raised a hand. I spent the entire day here. I saw how your team behaves when you're not watching. They're anxious, worn out, and constantly walking on eggshells. That doesn't happen in healthy environments. She leaned against the wall, her arms still crossed. We're short-staffed. We've been covering shifts for 3 people. You try running this place with 2 closers quitting in the same month. Then why did they quit? I don't know, she snapped. Maybe they couldn't handle the pace. Jacob's expression didn't change. Or maybe they couldn't handle working under someone who treats them like they're disposable. Her silence stretched. He finally stepped back toward the door. I'm shutting this location down temporarily. Effective immediately. Staff will be reassigned. You won't be part of that. She straightened. You're firing me? I'm holding you accountable, he said and opened the door. Word spread within minutes. The team gathered near the front, unsure of what was coming next. They stood clustered near the register, whispering. No one made eye contact with Cheryl as she walked out of the office. She didn't say a word, just grabbed her coat off the hook and left. Jacob walked to the center of the store. The air was heavy, like everyone was bracing themselves for another blow. I know you've heard what's happening, he began. This store will close for the next 10 days. During that time, we're going to make changes physical, structural, and cultural. No one spoke. You're not losing your jobs. I've arranged temporary placements at nearby locations. Transportation will be reimbursed. If that's a hardship, we'll figure something else out. A tall barista with a faint accent raised her hand slowly. Are we being punished too? Jacob shook his head. You're not the problem. You've been surviving a toxic environment. That ends now. But I need your help to fix it. The crew exchanged looks. The tension didn't vanish, but it shifted. Uncertainty gave way to something else, curiosity. He turned to a young man adjusting the pastry case. What's your name? Marcus. How long have you worked here? 7 months. You've seen things go downhill? Marcus hesitated. Yeah. Since December. People started leaving, and shifts got longer. Cheryl wouldn't let us swap unless she approved it personally. Sometimes she'd deny it just to prove a point. Another worker, a middle-aged woman with streaks of gray in her braids, nodded. She'd threatened to cut hours if anyone complained. Said we were lucky to have jobs. Jacob took a breath, then said quietly, "You're not lucky to work here. We're lucky to have you. That's how it's supposed to be." Someone near the prep station whispered, "That's not how it felt." He turned to her. "I know, but you deserved better." He looked around the place. Cracked tile near the back counter. A broken ceiling vent still duct-taped. He hadn't noticed any of it in the reports. "I'm bringing in a new manager. Someone who understands what leadership actually means. Until then, I'll be checking in personally. You'll see me more often. Not just when things go wrong." A soft murmur swept through the room. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't silence either. Jacob nodded once, then stepped outside to call his operations team. He didn't get far before someone followed him. It was the tall barista, the one who'd asked if they were being punished. "I'm Liana," she said quietly. "I didn't think anybody up top even knew our store existed." He turned toward her. "I did. I just stopped paying close enough attention." She paused, then said, "I stayed because of the team, not the manager. We looked out for each other when she didn't." He nodded. "I saw that. You've got good instincts. Ever consider a leadership role?" She blinked. "I've trained new hires before, but not officially." "I'm not offering anything today," he said, "but I'm paying attention now." She nodded, unsure what to say. As she turned to go back inside, Jacob looked up at the store's worn sign. The letters were still intact, but the glow was uneven. He made another call, this time to the facilities team. "Replace the exterior signage. We're not papering over this. We're rebuilding it." He ended the call and took a step back, watching the customers trickle out of the other shops nearby. His stores had always been about more than coffee or sandwiches. They were supposed to be places where people felt seen. That mission had been lost somewhere along the way. But not anymore. 3 days after the closure, the store sat quiet behind locked glass. Inside, the lights were off, the counters stripped bare. A temporary vinyl sign on the front door read, "Closed for renewal." That was Jacob's phrasing. He didn't want the team thinking they were being shut down as punishment. This wasn't about blame, it was about repair. He arrived at the location just after sunrise, coffee in hand, and stepped into the silence. The maintenance crew had already begun. Floor tiles had been pulled up, counters disassembled, and the ceiling vent that once rattled above the prep line was gone completely. He walked slowly through the stripped space, the echo of his footsteps bouncing off bare walls. Liana arrived an hour later. She carried a canvas tote and wore a nervous energy that didn't match her usual composure. He met her near the service counter, where a contractor was measuring the support beam. "They told me to report here," she said, setting the bag down. "I wasn't sure if I was supposed to wear a uniform." "You're not on shift," Jacob said. "You're shadowing me today." She hesitated. "Shadowing? I want your perspective while we rebuild this place. You've been on the floor, working beside these people. I need someone who understands what's actually needed." Liana looked around at the half-demolished interior. "I've never done anything like this." "That's why you're valuable. You haven't learned the wrong way." They walked the space together. Jacob asked questions constantly. How did the team handle rushes? Where were the bottlenecks? Which tasks slowed service, and which ones were just busy work? She answered honestly, sometimes pausing to think, sometimes shaking her head when she didn't have a solution. He didn't mind. He wasn't looking for polish, he wanted clarity. Mid-morning, a tall man in a pressed blue shirt arrived. He had a calm, observant demeanor and carried himself like someone used to being underestimated. Jacob introduced him to Liana as Mason, the new manager. Mason greeted her with a dry handshake and a quiet, "Nice to meet you," then turned to Jacob. I've reviewed the last 6 months of scheduling, turnover, and vendor logs, he said. I think I understand where things went sideways. No assumptions, Jacob said. Start fresh. Learn the people first. Mason nodded. Then I'll make time to meet each of them. One-on-one.
No clipores.
Jacob looked at Liana. You'll coordinate that. I want him to hear from everyone. She gave a slow nod, processing the weight of the role. Okay, I'll make it work. As they stood amid the exposed framework and stacked supplies, a delivery van pulled up outside. The driver stepped out, carrying a clipboard. Jacob recognized him instantly. It was the same young man Cheryl had berated. Jacob stepped outside before the driver could ring the bell. The kid looked startled for a second, then wary. You probably weren't expecting to be back here, Jacob said. The driver shrugged. Didn't know I was. Routes change. I owe you something, Jacob said. You don't. I just dropped boxes. You were treated like trash. That's not how we do things here, not anymore. The driver glanced at the storefront. Did they fire her? Yes. He looked down at the clipboard, then handed it over. You can sign here. Jacob didn't take it. We're not accepting deliveries today. Store's being rebuilt. The driver frowned. Then why am I here? To ask you something, Jacob said. What's your name? Derek. Derek, how long you been with the company? 2 years. You like it? He hesitated. I mean, it's work. Pays decent. Some stops are good. Some aren't. What makes a stop good? People don't treat you like you're invisible. Or worse. Jacob nodded. You ever think about doing more than deliveries? I don't have a degree or anything, Derek said. Didn't finish school. That's not what I asked. Derek looked at him carefully. I guess. I just never thought it was for me. Jacob gestured to the storefront. We're rebuilding this place from the ground up. Not just the walls. The team. The culture. I want people here who know what it's like to be on the other side. You offering me a job? I'm offering you a start. Shadow shifts.
Paid.
You decide if it's for you. Derek looked down at his shoes, then back at the store. Let me think about it. Take your time. Jacob returned the clipboard and signed. No delivery today, but thanks for coming. Back inside, Liana was reviewing old team schedules with Mason. She looked up when Jacob returned. I didn't know you were looking at hiring, she said. I wasn't, he said, until 5 minutes ago. They spent the rest of the day sketching layout changes. Mason suggested moving the point of sale station to reduce traffic jams. Liana pointed out that the storage area's layout forced workers to walk too far between tasks. Jacob listened and took notes. By mid-afternoon, the operations team arrived to install new inventory systems. Jacob stayed out of their way, watching Liana interact with them. She asked sharp, specific questions. Not to impress, but to understand. When they broke for a late lunch, the three of them sat on crates near the back doorway, eating sandwiches out of paper bags. You ever think about running a store? Mason asked Liana. She gave a small laugh. Not seriously. You should, he said. You see things most people miss. Jacob didn't interrupt. He let the silence settle. Liana was thinking it through, and he didn't want to rush her. Later, as the daylight began to fade, Jacob pulled Mason aside while Liana helped the contractors label new supply bins. She's going to be your assistant manager, Jacob said. Mason didn't hesitate. Good call. Your job is to make sure she's ready for more. And if she outgrows the store? Mason asked. Then we build something bigger. Mason nodded once, then walked back to the others. Jacob stayed back for a moment, watching the scene. The walls weren't finished. The equipment was still in boxes. But something had shifted. This wasn't a repair job anymore. It was a reset.